you, Sam, and good evening to you lovely folk watching from home. And, most importantly, a good Friday to you ahead of the Easter bank holiday weekend. Yeah, that's right, it's Easter. Did you remember? I know we've been conditioned in recent times to, I don't know, I guess renounce our faith at the altar of political correctness, gesture eggs, defacing hot cross buns, even the industrial baptising of channel migrants who couldn't give a toss about Christianity, but who simply want to scam the system and stay in the UK. But let me remind you of something. This is a Christian country. The Anglican Church maintains its status of religion of the state, and the King, Charles, he's still head of the church. So never forget it. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a practising Christian. I certainly wouldn't indoctrinate my kids with the idea of religion either, but I do have some faith in some sort of a God, and I believe in the lessons of Jesus Christ. Do to others as you'd want done to yourself. Love your neighbour. Value peace. Value truth. Don't lie. Don't steal. Cherish relationships with people, with nature and even yourself. And, of course, be grateful. Show gratitude. So you don't need to be a religious nut to think those things are pretty good values to live your life by. And I guess maybe if more of us did take heed of those lessons, we wouldn't end up with the feral gangs of kids we saw running riot in places like Milton Keynes yesterday. Or just maybe, if more of us were brought up to value life as Jesus did and to never take the life of another, we wouldn't see the kind of knife crime savagery currently gripping London. So look, like I said, I'm going to stress this. I'm not asking you to go and repent your sins while reciting verses of the Bible, despite what some militant Christians will try and force you to do. In actual fact, one of them last week on Twitter told me that Jesus wouldn't love me because he doesn't allow us to be half in, half out. Well, let me tell you something, pal. That kind of Jesus doesn't sound very loving to me, and my version of the bloke is a lot more generous than the judgmental and conditional person you like to portray. So, this Easter, let's come together for family, friendship, faith in something bigger than ourselves, and faith that things will work out for the better. Because if we don't have faith in the future, there's little to live for today. And if you don't care about any of that, just enjoy the chocolate. I'm going to get stuck into mine now. And by the way, my panel tonight, my big panel, the wokest man in Britain used to belong to Benjamin Butterworth, but it now belongs to Kai Wilshaw, who was on Saturday 5 with me a few weeks ago, and you were too far left for even Benjamin Butterworth. And, of course, the very talented TV personality Ingrid Tarrant.
Hello.
Good evening to you both. Thank you for being here. I'm going to be Willy Wonka for the next couple of minutes. Kai, this is for you. Caramel crunch. Wow. Happy Easter.
Oh.
And
how did you know?
Ingrid, for you, utterly nuttily.
Utterly nuttily?
No.
Is that...
Picked, of course, to suggest that you're absolutely barking mad.
Thank you. Well, funny enough, I've got something for you.
Oh.
It's not as big.
This will be my first one of the weekend.
Look.
Oh, thank you. Easter bunny lollipop, there we go.
Yeah.
I feel terrible for being empty-handed now.
That's all right. Look, that's what happens with you wokies and you lefties. You only think of yourselves, don't you? So come on then, let's get your thoughts on that that big opinion. As I said, I'm not a massive religious person, but I do kind of have some sort of affinity with Jesus and God, you know, whatever that is. Is it important we kind of heed the lessons of Jesus in some aspects of our lives, do you reckon, Ingrid?
Yes, definitely. And you don't have to be religious to look at the 10 commandments and put them into just normal everyday living. So it is, as you rightly said, do unto others as you'd like to have done to yourself. Don't steal, don't kill. You know, the 10 commandments are actually, you know, a very, very good guideline. It makes you follow the rules to be a good person that other people respect, and it's all about mutual respect.
Are you religious?
I'm not Bible bashing as such.
No offence to anyone watching who...
No, and I don't go to church every Sunday, but I do say my prayers every night, and I do believe in God.
Yeah.
And I find comfort in that.
This is all getting a bit deep, isn't it, for a Friday night?
Well,
Kai,
it is Easter.
What do you reckon?
Well, I'm going to surprise you. I actually grew up in quite a strong tradition of Welsh nonconformist church-going. We're not particularly pious, to be honest. We're not that religious, but I think it's really about those values of community and honesty. And as you say, just because there is a decline in church-going in the United Kingdom, it doesn't mean that we have to cast off all those values behind that faith and behind Christian religion. And so I totally agree. I think, you know, we need to bear that in mind. And I do feel, not only with Easter, but also with other religious holidays, that they have seemed to become too commercial, right? Every January, as soon as the Christmas stuff is out of the shops, the Easter eggs are in.
Can I just make a point? In recent weeks, we've had that situation, which wasn't Cadbury's, by the way. Let me make that clear. It was the shop selling the Easter eggs, but they labelled it as gesture eggs. We had an incident with Westminster Council earlier today where they had a Ramadan display and nothing about Easter, which they hurriedly went to amend. We've had various examples of, it feels like Christianity being kind of eroded away from society. Is that intentional? I mean, what's going on there?
It almost seems to be intentional, but because it's happening so quickly and it's so obvious. And it's right to say, we are a Christian country and we're not upholding that. We're almost embarrassed. That's the terrible problem. So we do all the virtue signalling for the Muslims and immigrants. We make people feel very welcome from other cultures, which is exactly right. But it doesn't mean that we actually have to ignore our own culture to accommodate other people of different cultures.
Why are we so godless?
Do you know...
Because I reckon, right, if I walk down the high street tomorrow and I asked 100 people, do you believe in God or do you believe in Jesus? Not necessarily, like me, are you an absolute, you know, religious fanatic, but do you just believe in Jesus or God? I reckon most people would say no.
Do you know, I think statistically it's under 50%. I think it's something like 47%. Don't, well, believe... But and then you break that down and they don't know what they believe in, kind of like something, but they're not practicing Christians. And that is really terrible. But, do you know, the church itself doesn't help. A lot of the... I did occasionally go to church and it became quite politicised, even with village issues. Honestly.
And like nosy neighbours, curtain switches.
It is that, and I don't go to church for that. I like to hear a really good sermon that's appropriate to us and the way that we live and to uphold values and morals and things like that. Not for it to become sort of like a pulpit to point out political things or even like little village things. I think it's wrong.
Get it. But Kai, so you grew up going to church, right?
Yes.
Do you think that some of today's behaviour we see, especially from young people, we saw the clips from Milton Keynes, we've seen some really horrific incidents this week on, you know, the train with the stabbing, there was another stabbing in London as well. Do you think any of that boils down to the fact that people don't believe in something bigger than themselves and, you know, what have they got to live for, pretty much?
I think it's also about the fact that there are no community hubs anymore. You know, for me... when I went to
Amy
church...
Nicole Turner said that earlier. What, like libraries and youth clubs?
I know, but I think...
Such a cop-out.
No, but it's not, because, you know...
It's true, I agree.
If you look at funding for children's services, for instance, right, 2010, £1.4 billion a year. Now, it's less than £500 million. And churches often were also that hub of activity that meant that people stayed out of trouble, that they learned about the sort of morals that you were talking about in your introduction. That doesn't exist anymore, and I think we've lost that.
That sounds really old-fashioned.
Yeah, but whether it's religious or not, you know, I mean, I used to go to a youth evening class as part of as part of my church, and not everybody was religious. In fact, we had lots of scientists in there who completely disavowed religion, but we talked openly about faith, science, philosophy, and it meant that we had something to bind us all together.
I didn't grow up playing table tennis and ping pong in a youth club, and I haven't gone out and stabbed people and, you know, behaved like an absolute...
Of course, there's no excuse for that, of course.
You know, and also, I'll just make this point as well. A lot of people have really hard upbringings and go through a lot of, you know, so-called trauma and stuff, but the wise thing to do, and most people do this, is they learn from what, you know, they don't become a victim and then use that as an excuse to behave badly. They use it as inspiration to say, you know, I went through this, I didn't enjoy the experience, I'm going to use it. For example, I'll be a good father. I'm going to be a really good father to my kids because my father as a child was horrible. I don't think the fact that there aren't youth clubs or Sunday services, I think it's absolute BS.
It's not a silver bullet.
Yeah, it's not a silver bullet, but that is part of it.
Yes.
But, you know, it's easier said than done because a lot of these kids don't have the stability of the family that perhaps all of us did have. And that's why...
I didn't have a stable family growing up.
But were they a good family? Did they sort of...
You would.
Did they have values?
I'm absolutely not ever going to go into detail about my childhood growing up because it will blow your mind. But was it stable? No, absolutely.
All right,
absolutely
then
not.
stable, perhaps...
But I'm not a wrong-un. Well, some people might think I'm a wrong-un.
No, you're not wrong. But then you were lucky and fortunate, I should say. And maybe you're in an environment where the influence of the other kids and their families had that positive influence on you, so that what your family, you know, sort of how you were brought up was kind of just in the shade of the way that the others were brought up, because I do think that's a huge part of it. It's your immediate environment. So when you talk about kids looking for inspiration and sort of saying, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to learn by the mistakes of my parents or whatever, if you're in an environment like a sinker state, you can't see out of it.
Yeah.
You're in a black hole, and that's why it's so hard. And that's why we do need to kind of draw together, give them something to make them or help them aspire to things that they can see the goodness in and not learn from their... It's learned behaviour, a lot of this.
I had a very loving and decent mother growing up, so I maybe attribute a lot of things to her. But Kai, do you reckon, in terms of all these youngsters running around and, you know, pulling knives on each other, do we need to maybe start Sunday schools or something like that, as you've alluded to? Or, I reckon, which is an even better idea, national service, 2 years of it.
I don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, but as we were saying, there's all sorts of different things that will allow kids to pull themselves up, get out of a situation that, you know, isn't good for them, right? Whether it's youth centres, church, sports, music, I mean, all of those things are part of it, right? But I do think we need to really refocus on what are those avenues to get kids out of trouble, to keep them socialising. I mean, you know, after the COVID pandemic, when they were completely unsocialised, and now, you know, you hear from teachers that kids are feral, right? Screens don't help,
I love
phones don't help. I mean, all of this needs to be solved in some way. And I think that, yes, churches, children's services are part of the answer, but, you know, anything to get kids out of those circumstances is to be recommended.
But nothing really works in Britain these days. I do feel sorry for young people. They can't get houses. They're not having families because of that. You know, the future does look a bit bleak. But my point is, without being too religious or preachy, Jesus, on this Easter weekend, had some good lessons. So maybe let's try and take heed of them.